You think you could just leave? Oh.
It began with a silence, the kind of silence that gnaws at the edges of your mind, that makes you check the clock again and again, until minutes feel like hours. Friends dialed her number. No answer. Messages went unread. And then, one chilling question lingered in the air. Where was Claire Thompson? The night was restless. Rain lashed against the windows of her small suburban home, tapping like bony fingers on glass. Streetlights flickered under the storm's fury, casting long shadows across the empty road. Inside, the glow of a single lamp still burned, but the house was hollow, too quiet, too still. Neighbors later admitted that the storm wasn't the only thing unsettling them that night. Something about the house, about the way it seemed frozen in time, sent a shiver down their spines. Claire was just 29. She loved poetry, late-night cooking, and the sound of vinyl records spinning on her old turntable. To her friends, she was the dependable one, the one who never missed a birthday, who always showed up with wine and laughter. To her parents, she was their only daughter, the light of their lives. But to one man, her boyfriend, Michael Reynolds, Claire was something else. A possession. When she didn't arrive at work the next morning, her colleagues were alarmed. Claire never missed a shift. By noon, her phone still went unanswered. By evening, her family filed a missing persons report. The police broke through the door that night. What they found would spark one of the most disturbing investigations the town had ever seen. A half-packed suitcase sat near the bedroom door. A shattered wine glass stained the carpet crimson. The faint scent of her perfume still clung to the air. But Claire herself was nowhere to be found. Detectives scoured the house, tracing every step. There was no sign of forced entry. No broken locks, no obvious struggle, at least not at first glance. But as one officer opened the closet door, his flashlight beam caught something chilling. Strands of blonde hair clinging to a jagged edge of wood, torn free in desperation. And then, beneath the bed, an envelope. Inside it, pages from Claire's journal. Her handwriting was hurried, trembling. One line stood out, etched in fear. If something happens to me, it won't be an accident. Her words were the spark. And the man she wrote them about, Michael, was suddenly the center of a storm that would unravel into lies, betrayal, and murder. But the question remained, where was Claire? And what really happened on the night she vanished? The police were no closer to finding Claire when the search teams combed the nearby woods. It had been 3 days. Days without any solid leads. And Claire's family clung to each thread of hope, each sliver of promise that she might still be out there, somewhere. But hope fades when all that's left are questions. And Claire's disappearance? It was anything but a simple missing persons case. The journal found beneath the bed kept whispering in Detective Hayes's mind, if something happens to me, it won't be an accident. He read the words again, his fingers trembling. Was she afraid? And if so, afraid of who? The first thing detectives learned about Michael Reynolds was his charm. He was handsome, smooth-talking, and seemingly perfect. He had been with Claire for over 2 years, and by all accounts, they appeared to be the perfect couple. A couple full of love, promise, and plans for the future. But the cracks began to show as the investigation dug deeper into Michael's past. Beneath the surface of the golden-haired boyfriend lay a darker side. Neighbors recalled overhearing heated arguments late at night. Friends spoke of Claire growing distant, of her reluctance to talk about Michael. She joked about getting out if things didn't change. Michael's alibi was shaky at best. He claimed he was at a friend's house the night Claire went missing, but no one could corroborate his story. His phone records told a different tale. His location pinged near the house after he supposedly left. Hayes knew something wasn't adding up. It was late one evening when a break came, a discovery that would change everything. A hiker, lost and trying to navigate the forest, stumbled upon something unusual. A piece of jewelry, half buried beneath a pile of dead leaves. It was Claire's favorite necklace, the one Michael had given her on their first anniversary. The pendant was an engraving of two intertwined hearts. Claire never went anywhere without it. The discovery sent a chill through the entire investigation team. Was Claire close? Had she been nearby all along? Lost in the woods? The search was redirected, but the rain had begun again, washing away any hope of finding clear tracks. As days turned into weeks, the search for Claire continued, but the police were starting to piece together an even darker puzzle. The journal entries weren't the only shocking revelations about Michael. Claire's therapist, when contacted, revealed something chilling. Claire had confessed that she felt trapped in the relationship. The intensity of Michael's love had started to feel more like control. She felt isolated, cut off from her friends, and sometimes even her family. At first, she thought it was a phase, just growing pains in their relationship. But then, the emotional manipulation began. Michael would get angry over the smallest things, and those feelings would sometimes spill over into physical violence, pushes, shoves, bruises that Claire would hide with makeup. Had Michael been a wolf in sheep's clothing all along? Detective Hayes wasn't the type to jump to conclusions, but it was hard to ignore the weight of the evidence. It was clear that Michael wasn't the man he appeared to be. Claire had been terrified of him, but why had she stayed? Why hadn't she left? The questions tormented the detective as much as they tormented Claire's family. On the fourth day of the search, Hayes called Michael in for questioning. He walked into the station confidently, looking every bit the part of the man who could do no wrong. His appearance was immaculate, his shirt crisp, his hair neatly combed, but there was a subtle twitch in his jaw. "I told you everything I know," Michael said, his voice cool but with a slight edge. "I don't know where she is, but you know more than you're telling us," Hayes said, his voice steady. "Your alibi doesn't hold up, Michael. Your phone records don't add up. And we found her necklace in the woods. Claire's necklace. What does that tell us about what happened that night?" Michael shifted in his seat, eyes flickering with something that looked like panic, quickly masked by calm. "I didn't do anything to her. You have to believe me." But Hayes could see it in his eyes. The cracks were starting to show. The interrogation ended without a confession. But the next day, something else came to light. Michael Reynolds had been hiding something, a secret so deep that it threatened to bring the entire case crashing down. And when that secret was revealed, it would shatter everything Claire's family thought they knew about the man they had welcomed into their lives. Where was Claire? What had really happened the night she disappeared? And was Michael the one to blame? Or was there something darker at play? Detective Hayes sat at his desk, reviewing the case files late into the night. The storm outside raged on, thunder rolling like an ominous soundtrack to the thoughts spiraling in his mind. Claire's disappearance had been haunting, but what was even more disturbing was the realization that Michael Reynolds might have been hiding something much darker than anyone had imagined. It wasn't just the necklace in the woods. It wasn't just the lies about his alibi. It was the discovery of a second phone. Hidden in Michael's apartment, tucked away in a drawer beneath a stack of old receipts, was a burner phone. One that wasn't registered in his name, wasn't connected to any of his usual accounts. It was clean, bare. The perfect tool for someone who wanted to hide their tracks. Hayes's heart raced as he flipped through the phone's call logs. And then, there it was, a string of calls to a number that was only labeled as unknown. The calls were made the night Claire disappeared. One call had been placed just minutes before Claire's last known contact with her best friend Lily. The last message Claire had sent to Lily had been filled with confusion. "I think he knows. Something's off. I don't feel safe." Hayes felt the weight of the pieces falling into place. Michael's behavior was starting to make sense. His attempts to control Claire, his dismissiveness about the investigation, his cold demeanor. But it wasn't just control anymore. It was something deeper. The next day, Hayes decided to press harder. He brought in Michael's old college roommate Jake, who had been a frequent visitor to their home. Michael was always a bit possessive, Jake said, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. But it wasn't until the last few months that I started to see a change. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was jealous, obsessively so. I caught him one night staring at Claire's phone when she wasn't around. He said he was checking on her, but it felt off. Jake shifted again, looking down at his hands. And there was this incident. I'm not proud to admit it, but Michael asked me for help. He said Claire was getting too close to someone else, someone she worked with. He wanted me to scare him off. I didn't do it. But I don't think Michael cared too much for Claire's freedom. The words hit Hayes like a slap. Michael had been jealous. He had seen Claire not as a partner, but as something to be controlled, to be kept close. But why didn't anyone notice? Was it all just hidden beneath a mask of charm? As the investigation continued, new clues came to light, unraveling the twisted timeline of Claire's final days. Her bank accounts had been drained in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Michael had transferred large sums of money, but it wasn't to any bank he had been withdrawing from her personal account, systematically emptying it while she was none the wiser. But it was one final detail that would change everything. When the police checked Michael's apartment again, they found something that had been left behind a security camera, hidden beneath the kitchen counter, its wire running into the back of the fridge. The footage was chilling. For 2 weeks before Claire's disappearance, Michael had secretly recorded everything that happened in the apartment. And what they saw on the video? Well, it was enough to make Hayes' stomach turn. Claire had started to change. She was withdrawing. She was terrified. But it was the last video, the last night, that truly haunted them all. The camera had caught Michael in a violent outburst. Claire was sitting on the couch, shaking as he raged at her, blaming her for things she couldn't understand. Then, as if the storm inside him couldn't hold any longer, Michael had lunged at her, grabbing her wrist with such force that it left bruises. The footage ended there just before the camera was knocked off the counter. Hayes knew it was time to bring Michael in again. This time, the tension in the interrogation room was palpable. Michael sat across from him, more composed than ever, his arrogance wearing a thin mask of confidence. But Hayes saw through it. Michael was unraveling. His guilt was palpable in the way his fingers twitched, how his gaze darted toward the door like he was already thinking of ways to escape. "You've been lying, Michael," Hayes said, his voice steady but full of venom. "The footage, the phone calls, the money transfers, it's all here. You were controlling Claire. You were isolating her. And now, she's gone." Michael's face twisted for the briefest moment, before he masked it with that same cool composure. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped. "I loved her. She was mine." Hayes leaned in closer, his voice low and threatening. "Tell me where she is, Michael. Tell me where Claire is, or I swear to God, I will make sure you never see the light of day again." Michael's gaze darkened. He finally opened his mouth, but instead of a confession, his words sent shockwaves through the room. "You think you know everything, detective," he sneered. "But you don't. You haven't even scratched the surface. If you want to find her, you'll have to go deeper. I didn't do this alone." The room froze. The weight of his words hit Hayes like a freight train. Michael wasn't just a murderer. He had an accomplice. And that accomplice was someone close, someone even closer than Hayes had ever imagined. Who was Michael working with? And what truly happened to Claire that night? The air in the interrogation room grew dense, heavy with tension. Detective Hayes sat still, his mind racing as Michael's words hung in the air. "I didn't do this alone." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Hayes stared across the table at Michael, whose eyes now held something dangerous, almost defiant. Hayes had known it was never going to be easy to crack Michael. But this was a revelation he wasn't prepared for. Michael wasn't just a suspect anymore. He wasn't just a controlling, possessive boyfriend with a dark side. Now, Michael was a part of something bigger, something more complicated and more sinister than Hayes had ever imagined. For a long moment, Hayes simply stared at Michael, who refused to look back, instead focusing on the table in front of him. His jaw clenched, and Hayes could feel the weight of his words. "Who else is involved, Michael?" Hayes asked, his voice low but thick with frustration. "Who was helping you? Who did this to Claire?" Michael's lips barely moved as he spoke, but his voice was cold, almost too calm. "You'll never find them, detective, but you'll find the truth if you dig deep enough." Hayes's thoughts reeled. What had Michael meant? Dig deeper? He was already buried in evidence, buried in the tangled mess of Claire's last days, her missing bank accounts, the burner phone, the hidden cameras. What more was there to uncover? But as he replayed the words over and over in his mind, something stood out, something he hadn't fully grasped before. Michael had said, "You haven't scratched the surface." It wasn't just about Claire's disappearance. It wasn't just about the violence and control. Michael had implied there was more to the story, a part of the puzzle he hadn't shown them yet. Hayes clenched his fists, feeling the frustration grow. The deeper he dug into Michael's life, the more questions seemed to emerge, none of them adding up. It was as if someone had carefully designed this entire scenario to make it nearly impossible to find the truth. The next day, something unexpected happened. A new witness came forward, a former neighbor of Michael's. Her name was Linda, and she had lived in the same building as Michael and Claire for over a year. Linda had been hesitant to speak at first, but after hearing about the investigation in the news, she felt she had no choice but to come forward. "I didn't want to get involved, but I saw something," Linda said, her voice shaking. "It was about a week before Claire disappeared. Michael, he was outside his apartment, talking to someone. It was late at night, and I could see them from my window. He looked angry. But what caught my attention was that the person he was talking to wasn't anyone I recognized. They were wearing a hoodie. Their face was hidden, but I heard Michael say something like, 'It has to be done soon. She's getting too close to the truth.'" Hayes's pulse quickened. The words echoed in his mind. She's getting too close to the truth. Who was Michael speaking to? What truth was he afraid of Claire discovering? Linda went on, describing how the person left in a hurry, slipping away through the back exit of the building. "This wasn't the first time I've seen Michael acting suspicious," Linda added. "He used to stay in his apartment for days on end. But sometimes I'd see him sneaking in and out at odd hours, always alone. I thought it was strange, but I never thought anything of it." Hayes's mind was racing. This witness, this seemingly insignificant detail, had just opened up a whole new avenue of investigation. Michael wasn't acting alone. There was someone else, someone close, who had been pulling the strings all along. Hayes followed the new lead immediately, hoping to trace the mysterious figure who had been in contact with Michael. With the help of the tech team, they dug deeper into Michael's communications, tracing the calls to the burner phone and identifying a location, a public payphone across town. But when Hayes arrived at the payphone, he found nothing. No cameras, no witnesses. The area was deserted, the cold concrete and graffiti-covered walls offering no answers. It felt like another dead end. But as Hayes stood there, staring at the empty street, a sudden thought hit him. Michael had to know he was being watched. He knew the cameras, the burn phone, everything. But this person wasn't a fool. The mystery deepened. The more they looked into Michael's life, the more elusive the answers became. Hayes couldn't help but feel as though he was chasing shadows, each lead leading to another dead end. And with each passing day, the weight of Claire's disappearance grew heavier. Over the next few days, the pressure on Michael intensified. The police combed through every inch of his life, every corner of his apartment, but there were no more leads, no more answers. He remained cold, detached, refusing to give up any more information. Meanwhile, Hayes continued to work tirelessly, running down every lead, even the smallest ones. It wasn't until a breakthrough came, in the form of Claire's childhood friend, Maddie, that something shifted. Maddie had been Claire's best friend since they were kids. They had shared everything with each other: laughs, tears, secrets. And when Claire had disappeared, Maddie was one of the first to speak out, pleading for any information about her missing friend. But Maddie had also noticed something strange, a pattern in the texts Claire had sent her in the months leading up to her disappearance. Maddie recalled one specific message Claire had sent, cryptic yet chilling. "I think Michael's hiding something from me. I don't know what, but I feel like I'm in danger." Hayes stared at the message, his mind working in overdrive. He had seen Claire's journal, read her last words, but this message was the final piece of the puzzle. Claire had known. She had known something was wrong. Suddenly, the door to the interrogation room creaked open. Michael was brought in again, his hands shackled. His usual arrogance had given way to something else, something darker. "This is it," Hayes thought, his voice steady as he leaned forward. "You're going to break." Michael glanced at him, his eyes narrowing. "You think you've got it all figured out, don't you?" Michael sneered. "But you're wrong. You'll never find her. No one will." Just as Hayes opened his mouth to speak, something shifted in Michael's demeanor. He leaned forward, his face contorting into something unrecognizable. He whispered just loud enough for Hayes to hear, "You're looking in the wrong place." Michael's words hit Hayes like a punch to the gut. The wrong place? What did that mean? Before Hayes could respond, Michael was abruptly led out of the room. But the words lingered, echoing in his mind. The wrong place. And then it hit Hayes. He wasn't just dealing with a jealous boyfriend anymore. Michael wasn't the only one pulling the strings. There was someone else, someone who was still out there, hiding in the shadows, watching every move. The air in the interrogation room felt colder now, the silence between Detective Hayes and Michael growing thicker with every passing second. Michael's cryptic words, "You're looking in the wrong place," echoed in Hayes's mind like a warning bell. But where did it lead? Hayes had been sure he was getting closer to the truth. The burner phone, the hidden cameras, the bruises on Claire's wrists. But now, Michael had thrown a wrench into everything. The wrong place, what could that possibly mean? If Michael wasn't the end of this twisted road, then where was the real trail leading? As Hayes stood up and paced the room, he replayed everything he knew in his head. The lies, the manipulation, the jealousy. But Michael wasn't just lying about his whereabouts that night. He was lying about everything. It was as if Michael had been the puppet master in a game, carefully controlling the strings. But if Michael wasn't the only one pulling them, who was the puppet master? The days that followed Michael's cryptic remark only deepened the mystery. Every lead, every piece of evidence, seemed to point in different directions. There was no straightforward path to the truth. But then, something finally shifted just as Hayes was beginning to doubt his instincts. It started with a phone call, an anonymous tip from someone who claimed to have been watching Michael for months. The caller didn't give much away at first, just a few cryptic lines about Claire's disappearance and a name that was unfamiliar to Hayes. Emma Carter. "Emma's the key," the voice said in a low whisper before hanging up. The name struck a chord, though Hayes couldn't place it immediately. He knew he'd heard it before, but from where? Then, like a flash of lightning, it hit him. Emma Carter wasn't a stranger. She was Michael's ex-girlfriend. Hayes knew that Michael's past had always been a mystery. He was a man who liked to keep things buried. But now, a new piece of the puzzle had appeared. Hayes ordered the team to track down Emma Carter immediately. She had to know something. She had to be involved, especially after the anonymous tip. The deeper Hayes dug, the more he realized that Emma might hold the final key to everything. Within hours, they tracked her down to a modest apartment on the outskirts of town. She was cooperative when the officers arrived, though her face betrayed a flicker of recognition when Hayes introduced himself. "You're looking for Michael, aren't you?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. Hayes's heart skipped a beat. There was something in the way she said it that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. "I need you to tell me everything you know about Michael Reynolds and Claire Thompson," Hayes pressed, his voice firm but not unkind. "We know you were once close with him, Emma. You have to help us." Emma hesitated. Her fingers twisted nervously around the edges of a worn coffee mug as she glanced toward the window, as if expecting someone to be watching her. But when she spoke, her voice was steady, the confession lingering on the tip of her tongue. "You don't know him like I do," she said, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and regret. "Michael's not the person you think he is. He was never good for Claire. But I couldn't stop him." Hayes leaned forward. This was it. Emma was going to talk. "Tell me what happened, Emma. What did Michael do?" She let out a sigh, her breath shaky. "Michael told me Claire was getting too close to the truth. He kept talking about things she didn't know, about things I didn't understand. The last time I saw him, he told me he was going to take care of it. But I didn't think he meant this." Hayes felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Claire had been digging into something, and Michael had known it. But what truth had she been so close to? And why hadn't Michael told Emma the full story? "I should have stopped him," Emma whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "But I was scared. Michael, he had a way of making you believe whatever he wanted." As Hayes pieced together Emma's account, a horrifying realization set in. Claire hadn't just been another victim of a jealous boyfriend. She had been the victim of a long, calculated game. Michael had been hiding something dark in his past, something that Claire had unknowingly stumbled upon. But what could it have been? And why hadn't Emma come forward sooner? Hayes decided to push further, demanding answers. What was Claire getting too close to Emma? What did Michael mean by the truth? Emma took a long, shaky breath. "I never wanted to be involved in this, detective. But I'll tell you this. Michael wasn't just a jealous boyfriend. He was hiding something dangerous. He had a record, something he didn't want anyone to know about. He told me once that if anyone found out, his life would be over." Claire was getting close to uncovering whatever it was. But before Hayes could ask any more questions, Emma clammed up, her expression suddenly guarded. She had said enough to pique his curiosity, but not enough to lead to the answers he needed. "Do you know where Michael is?" Hayes asked, his patience wearing thin. "No," Emma answered quickly, shaking her head. "I haven't seen him since that night. He's gone, and I don't think he's coming back." Just as Hayes prepared to leave, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. It was a message from his team. "We've found something. You need to see this." His heart raced as he followed the instructions, heading to the lab for what could be the final piece of the puzzle. Was this the breakthrough he'd been waiting for? Was it possible that Michael's past had finally come to light? And what did it mean for Claire? As Hayes entered the lab, he could see the expression on his tech team's face. They were shocked. Whatever they had found wasn't just a clue, it was the game changer. "Detective," one of the officers said, voice strained, "you're not going to believe this. We found the missing files, and they lead straight to Michael's darkest secret." The screen flashed before him, an old criminal record, dating back years, hidden in plain sight. Michael Reynolds wasn't who he said he was. and the truth was far darker than anyone could have imagined. The files flashed before Hayes's eyes like a punch to the gut. They were old, dusty, and buried deep in a government database. But the moment he read the name on the screen, everything about the case clicked into place. Michael Reynolds had a criminal past, a past he'd kept hidden for years, and one that was far darker than anyone had anticipated. The file revealed that Michael had been arrested several years ago for the assault of a woman named Julia Lawson. The charges were eventually dropped due to lack of evidence, but the incident had haunted Michael for years. Julia had recanted her testimony, and the case had been buried just like Michael had wanted it. But now, Claire had unknowingly uncovered something that could have destroyed him. And as Hayes pieced together the details, he realized that Michael had done everything in his power to keep his past buried, even if it meant silencing Claire. Hayes sat at his desk, staring at the criminal record on the screen. Julia Lawson. The name repeated in his mind like a drumbeat. It wasn't just a one-off incident. It was part of a pattern. Michael's past had been filled with violent outbursts, manipulative behavior, and a disturbing disregard for the women he had been involved with. The more Hayes dug, the clearer the pattern became. Michael had a history of controlling his partners, keeping them isolated and under his thumb. Claire had been no different. But what made her different was that she had started to fight back. She had started to question him. She had started to ask too many questions. Claire had become dangerous to him. And when someone like Michael Reynolds feels threatened, there's only one outcome. Hayes's blood ran cold as he realized the depth of what Michael had done. The question no longer was who had done this to Claire, but how he had done it without leaving a trace. Hayes wasn't done yet. There was more to uncover. He started reviewing all of Michael's old communications and records, trying to trace any links between him and Julia Lawson. What Hayes found next shook him to his core. Julia had left a single voicemail on Michael's phone the day before Claire disappeared. It was a short but chilling message. "I'm not going to keep quiet anymore. I've found the evidence. It's time for the world to know what you really are." It had been deleted, erased, but the tech team had managed to recover it, and the weight of that voicemail only deepened the mystery. What had Julia found? And had Claire known about it? Had she stumbled upon the same evidence? Hayes knew he had to talk to Julia Lawson. If she had the evidence that could unravel Michael's entire web of lies, then she held the key to the case. But finding her wouldn't be easy. Julia had gone into hiding years ago after the case was dropped. She had vanished from the public eye, living under an alias. Through a series of calls and connections, Hayes tracked her down to a small town a few hundred miles away. When he finally found her, she was living a quiet life, far removed from the trauma of her past. But Hayes knew she had information that could change everything. "I never wanted to be involved in this again," Julia said, her voice trembling as she stood in her modest home. "Michael, he destroyed me. He made me feel like I was crazy, like no one would believe me. I had to move away, start over. But now Claire's missing. And I know it's him. I know it." Julia's eyes were filled with raw emotion, fear, anger, and sorrow. It was clear that the trauma of the past had never left her. "Tell me everything you know, Julia," Hayes said, his voice calm but urgent. "What did you find? What was Michael hiding?" She hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting around the room, as if making sure no one was listening. Then, with a deep breath, she spoke. "I found the files," Julia said softly. "There were photos, documents, letters, proof of what he had done to me, to other women too. Michael had a pattern. He would isolate them, control them, and when they fought back, he'd destroy them mentally, emotionally, physically. I knew I had to go public with it. But then, Michael threatened me. He said if I ever told anyone, he would make sure I disappeared, just like the others." Everything that Julia said made sense. Michael had used his charm to manipulate the women in his life, carefully constructing an image of himself as a perfect boyfriend, a caring partner. But underneath it all was a predator, a man who knew exactly how to manipulate and control. Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that Michael had been hiding in plain sight. He had always been one step ahead, keeping everyone, including Claire, on edge. And now, as he pieced the clues together, it became clear that Claire's death had been no accident. Michael had planned it. He had orchestrated every detail to ensure that no one would ever discover the truth. But now, Julia's testimony, along with the recovered voicemail and the criminal record, had given Hayes the evidence he needed. Michael had been hiding his past, and Claire had unknowingly uncovered it. As Hayes prepared to confront Michael with the new evidence, the tension in the air was palpable. He could feel the weight of everything they had uncovered, the lies, the manipulation, the fear Claire had felt. Michael sat in the interrogation room once again, his face impassive, his arms folded across his chest. But Hayes could see it, the flicker of unease in his eyes. "This time, Michael," Hayes began, his voice firm, "there's nowhere left for you to hide. We know everything. The criminal record, the voicemail from Julia Lawson. We know what you did." Michael's lips twitched, but he remained silent. "I'm not going to ask you again, Michael," Hayes pressed, stepping closer. "Where is Claire? What happened that night?" Michael leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "You think you've won, don't you? You don't know the half of it. You don't even know what's coming next." Before Hayes could respond, Michael's phone buzzed on the table. Michael glanced at it quickly, his eyes narrowing. Hayes noticed it, and in that moment, everything seemed to slow down. "I think you should take that," Hayes said, his voice dangerously calm. Michael's gaze flickered. He stared at the phone, then back at Hayes. For a moment, it seemed like he might make a break for it. But instead, he slowly reached for the phone. The message that flashed across the screen made Hayes's blood run cold. "You're too late. We've already started. It's done." Michael's lips curled into a smile, and for the first time, Hayes saw real fear in his eyes. "It's already too late, Detective. You'll never stop us." The room fell silent as Hayes processed the chilling message. The puzzle was far from solved. Michael's web of lies had only grown more complex, and now there was someone else involved, a dangerous accomplice who was still out there. Who had Michael been working with? And what was this new threat that Hayes had just uncovered? The words from the message on Michael's phone echoed in Hayes's mind like a death knell. "You're too late. We've already started. It's done." For a moment, Hayes stood frozen in place. He could feel the weight of the investigation, the pressure mounting on him. The pieces had started to fit, but now the pieces were shifting, vanishing just as he thought he had them in place. Whoever was working with Michael was just as elusive, just as dangerous, and now they were playing a game with him. Hayes glanced at Michael, who was still seated, his eyes fixed on the phone, the smile never leaving his face. The arrogance was palpable. He knew something that Hayes didn't, and it was as if he was savoring the moment. "What do you mean it's done, Michael?" Hayes demanded, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "What have you done?" Michael leaned back in his chair, his hands still clasped together, his demeanor almost casual, despite the gravity of the situation. He shrugged, as if he had no real concern for what Hayes might do next. "You're too focused on Claire," Michael said, his voice low, almost mocking. "She's just a part of the bigger picture. You should be looking at what's coming next." Hayes's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected that answer. "What the hell are you talking about? What bigger picture? What's coming next?" But Michael didn't answer. Instead, he continued to smile, his eyes gleaming with a mix of smugness and something darker, something sinister. As Hayes left the interrogation room, he could feel his head spinning. The message, the calmness with which Michael had spoken, the lack of remorse. It was all a calculated game. But Michael wasn't the only one playing it. Whoever was working with him had been pulling strings from the very beginning. The question was, who? Back at the station, Hayes gathered the team. He ran through every lead they had, every piece of evidence they had collected. But the deeper they dug, the more elusive the answers became. It wasn't just about finding Michael anymore. It was about finding the real enemy, the one lurking in the shadows. "Have we tracked down that burner phone yet?" Hayes asked, his voice sharp. The tech team had been working around the clock, but so far, they hadn't been able to trace the phone's owner. It was a dead end. The phone's location had bounced between various anonymous locations, and its calls led to more dead ends. But one thing was clear. Whoever Michael had been in contact with was just as careful, just as determined to stay hidden. "We've got nothing," one of the officers admitted. "We're running out of options." Hayes slammed his fist onto the table in frustration. "There's got to be something we're missing," he muttered. "Think, people. There's a pattern. There's always a pattern." But even as he spoke, Hayes felt the creeping realization settle in. They were in a race against time. Every minute that passed, the mystery deepened. Every moment that Michael's accomplice remained free was another step closer to disaster. Then, something unexpected happened. A woman walked into the precinct. She was tall, with striking blonde hair and a determined look on her face. She didn't look like the kind of person who'd stumble into a police station looking for help. Her eyes were clear, focused, as if she already knew exactly what she wanted. "I have information on Michael Reynolds," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "And it's not just about Claire. It's about something much bigger." Hayes blinked, his mind still racing from the chaos of the past few hours. "Who are you?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. "My name's Lauren Shaw," she said, her expression hardening. "And I used to work with Michael." The room grew quieter. Everyone turned their attention to her, sensing that she was more than just a random witness. She was someone who knew Michael personally, and she had come forward at the most critical time. "What do you know about him?" Hayes asked, his voice laced with suspicion. "I know everything," Lauren said, her voice steady but with an edge of bitterness. "Michael's not who he says he is. He's been hiding a lot more than just his criminal record. The truth is, he's part of something much bigger, something much more dangerous than you can imagine." Lauren glanced over her shoulder, as if making sure no one else was listening. She lowered her voice. "Michael's involved in an underground network, a group that manipulates people, ruins lives, and then disappears without a trace. They've been doing this for years, and Michael's at the center of it all." Hayes's heart raced. "What are you talking about? Are you saying there's an organization, a group?" "Yes," Lauren replied, her eyes narrowing. "But it's not just any group. They're connected to high-profile individuals, people in positions of power who can make people disappear." Claire got too close to it. She started asking the wrong questions. She found something that Michael wasn't ready to expose, and that's why she's gone. Hayes stared at Lauren, trying to process what she was saying. It sounded unbelievable, but the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. Michael had been playing a game for years, one that had kept him one step ahead of everyone. He had known how to manipulate people, how to control them. And now, Hayes realized, he had been a part of something much larger than anyone could have ever imagined. The question wasn't just about finding Claire. It was about unraveling a conspiracy so vast that it reached beyond Michael, beyond Claire, into the very heart of the city's elite. "Why are you coming forward now?" Hayes asked, his voice urgent. Lauren looked at him, her expression filled with regret. "Because I know too much. Michael and the people he works with, they're dangerous. And if I don't help you stop them, I'll be next." With Lauren's help, the investigation took a darker turn. She provided Hayes with more information: names, locations, connections, each piece of the puzzle fitting together like a chain of evidence that pointed to something far more complex and deadly than Hayes could have imagined. The group Michael was involved with had been operating under the radar for years. They specialized in exploiting vulnerable individuals, controlling them with promises of wealth, power, or security, then discarding them once they were no longer useful. They had been behind countless disappearances, and Claire was just one of their victims. As Hayes reviewed the information, his mind raced. He couldn't help but wonder how deep the conspiracy went. How many people had Michael and his network destroyed over the years? The team worked around the clock, poring over every scrap of information Lauren had given them. The investigation had taken an even darker turn, and Hayes knew they were dangerously close to exposing a vast network of corruption. But just as they were about to make a breakthrough, something unexpected happened. A message arrived on Hayes' phone. This time, it wasn't from Michael. It was from someone else. "You're too late. We already know you're coming for us. If you continue, Claire's death will be the least of your problems." The message was signed with a single name: the Shepherd. Hayes' blood ran cold. Who was the Shepherd? And how many people had they already lost to this shadowy organization? The stakes had just become far higher, and the race against time had turned into something far more dangerous than anyone had ever anticipated. The message from the Shepherd sent a chill down Hayes' spine. It was one thing to suspect that Michael Reynolds was part of something bigger, something dangerous. But to be threatened by someone who clearly had the power to make threats with deadly consequences was an entirely different matter. "We already know you're coming for us. If you continue, Claire's death will be the least of your problems." The message was short, to the point, and chillingly clear. Whoever the Shepherd was, they weren't playing by the same rules. They were organized, well-connected, and, most importantly, dangerous. Hayes could feel the weight of the investigation grow heavier with every passing moment. He had always been a man of action, a detective who relied on facts, evidence, and instinct. But this was a battle of shadows, and the truth seemed more elusive than ever. He knew one thing for sure: the Shepherd wasn't a figure to be underestimated. As Hayes sat in his office, surrounded by case files and photographs, he realized that the clock was ticking. Every lead they had followed so far had brought them closer to exposing Michael's involvement in a network of powerful, influential people. But now, with the appearance of the Shepherd, everything had changed. The investigation had gone from a search for a missing woman to a battle against an unseen enemy, a well-oiled machine that could strike at any time. Hayes knew they had to find out who the Shepherd was. But as the hours passed, the pieces seemed to keep slipping through his fingers. They had no real name, no direct connection. All they had was a cryptic message and a warning. The feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was growing stronger. With his team on high alert, Hayes made the decision to bring Lauren back in. She knew more about Michael's past, and she might hold the key to understanding just who the Shepherd was. If anyone had an insight into this hidden world, it was her. When Lauren entered the room, she looked as if she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were tired, but there was a fire in her gaze, an urgency that hadn't been there before. "They're coming for us, aren't they?" Lauren said, her voice trembling. Hayes didn't answer right away. He couldn't lie to her. She was right. The threat was real. "We need to know everything you know about Michael and his connections. Anything. We need to understand who the Shepherd is." Lauren bit her lip, taking a deep breath. "I don't know the Shepherd personally, but I've heard whispers. Michael never mentioned them by name, but I've seen the way he behaves when he thinks someone's watching him. He's terrified of them. They have all the power." Hayes leaned in. "What do you mean by power?" "The Shepherd runs everything," Lauren said, her voice low, as if the walls had ears. They control people like Michael people, who have something to hide. They use threats, manipulation, and they've never been afraid to eliminate anyone who gets in their way. I don't know where they came from, but they're untouchable. And now that Claire's been caught in this web, well, I'm afraid the truth might be far worse than we've imagined. The team worked tirelessly through the night, going over every scrap of information they had gathered. With Lauren's cryptic revelations, Hayes had a new lead to follow. The shepherd, whoever they were, was the key to unlocking the entire mystery. But as they dug deeper, the stakes grew higher. The next day, Hayes received another unexpected call. It was a local journalist, Sarah Michaels, who had been following the case from the beginning. She had uncovered something that could crack the case wide open. "I think I know who the shepherd is," Sarah said breathlessly on the other end of the line. "You need to come to my office now." Hayes didn't waste a second. He grabbed his coat and headed out the door. Sarah had been a persistent reporter, always digging for the truth, even when others had written the case off as just another missing person story. But now, it seemed she had found something big. When Hayes arrived at her office, Sarah was waiting for him, her face pale, but her eyes alive with urgency. "I've been digging through old reports," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "And I think I've found a connection between the shepherd and a series of disappearances that go back decades, not just Claire. This goes back to people who've gone missing, people who were never found." She handed Hayes a stack of papers. As he flipped through them, his heart sank. The disappearances weren't isolated. They were part of a patterned people, mostly women, who had disappeared without a trace. But each of them had one thing in common. They had all come into contact with Michael Reynolds before they vanished. "There's a name that keeps showing up in the background," Sarah said, pointing to a list of dates and locations. "The shepherd, they're connected to a powerful organization. They move people through the system, hide them, and then they disappear. The pattern suggests that Michael was working for them. But how deep does this go? How many more lives have been ruined?" As Hayes pieced the puzzle together, the connections became clear. Michael had been involved with the shepherd for years, moving through the shadows, always one step ahead of the law. But this wasn't just a story about a man hiding his past. It was a story about an entire underground world of corruption, power, and control. Michael wasn't just a pawn in the shepherd's game, he was a key player. And now, Claire had become the latest victim in a long line of casualties. Hayes could feel the weight of the case pressing down on him, the weight of the lives destroyed by Michael and the shepherd. But there was still one unanswered question that gnawed at him. Where was Claire? With the pieces of the puzzle falling into place, Hayes and his team launched a coordinated strike, hoping to take down the shepherd before they could act again. They traced the communications, followed the money trail, and zeroed in on every person connected to the underground network. But as the operation unfolded, Hayes realized just how high the stakes had become. The closer they got to the shepherd, the more dangerous it became to dig. Whoever the shepherd was, they were untouchable. And now, Hayes was in the crosshairs. Just as Hayes thought they were about to get their break, an unexpected visitor showed up at his door, someone he never expected to see again. It was Michael Reynolds. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a figure cloaked in shadows, their face hidden by a hood. Michael's eyes were wide with fear, as though he had been pushed to his breaking point. "This isn't over, Detective," Michael said, his voice trembling. "You're in over your head. And if you continue, if you keep digging, you'll wish you hadn't." The mysterious figure stepped forward, and Hayes felt the air grow thick with menace. "You've already lost, Detective Hayes," the figure said in a voice that was both smooth and chilling. "There's no going back now." Michael turned and walked away, but Hayes didn't move. He knew the danger was only just beginning. The mystery of the shepherd was far from over, and now the clock was ticking faster than ever. Michael's words echoed in Hayes's mind long after he left the precinct. "You're in over your head, and if you keep digging, you'll wish you hadn't." There was no time to waste. Hayes could feel the weight of Michael's cryptic warning, but he couldn't afford to back down now. Too much had been uncovered, too many lives had been ruined, and too many questions remained unanswered. The deeper they dug, the closer they came to exposing the shepherd, but the more dangerous the investigation became. Hayes stared out the window of his office, the rain slashing against the glass. The storm outside mirrored the storm in his mind. He was getting closer, but each step forward seemed to lead him deeper into a world of shadows, where the line between truth and danger blurred. The figure Michael had been with, the cloaked figure, had been the final piece of the puzzle Hayes had yet to unlock. Who was that person? And why had Michael shown up now, after everything that had happened? Hayes's thoughts were interrupted by a call. It was from Lauren. Her voice, normally steady, now held a note of panic. "I think they know I'm talking to you," Lauren said, her breath ragged. "I've been getting strange messages, and I think someone's been following me." Hayes's stomach dropped. "What kind of messages, Lauren?" "Threatening ones," she whispered. "They know what I told you. They know I'm helping you." "Stay where you are. I'm coming to get you," Hayes ordered, his heart racing. He had been hoping to keep Lauren out of harm's way, but now it seemed like she was just as much a target as Claire had been. Hayes left the precinct immediately, heading to Lauren's apartment, his mind racing. He knew now that the threat from the shepherd was more than just a message, it was a warning. They were coming for everyone who got too close to the truth. And if he didn't act fast, Lauren could be next. When Hayes arrived at Lauren's building, the door to her apartment was ajar. His heart pounded in his chest as he slowly crept inside, his hand on the grip of his weapon. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. "Lauren?" Hayes called softly, his voice echoing through the empty hallway. There was no answer. The apartment was eerily still, the faint sound of the rain against the window the only noise. As Hayes moved deeper into the apartment, he noticed a series of photographs scattered across the floor. Photos of Claire, of Michael, of the investigation itself. The images were haunting, their sharp edges torn and frayed. And then Hayes froze. In the center of the room there was a message scrawled in thick red letters on the wall. "You're too late. The game has already begun." A chill ran down Hayes's spine. This wasn't just a warning. It was a declaration of war. Hayes's pulse quickened as he scanned the room. There was no sign of Lauren, but something in the corner of his eye caught his attention. On the desk, a laptop was open, the screen glowing with a series of documents, files that seemed far too important to be left behind. He moved quickly, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he searched through the files. They weren't just ordinary documents, they were records, names, connections. The shepherd's network laid out in front of him like a map of corruption and power, stretching across the city and beyond. The deeper Hayes went, the more horrifying it became. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. This wasn't just an underground group, it was an empire. The files detailed the names of politicians, high-profile businessmen, and wealthy elites, all connected to the shepherd. These were the people who had been pulling the strings, manipulating events from behind the scenes. Michael had been their pawn, their muscle, but now Hayes realized he was only a small piece of something much, much larger. He scrolled through the documents, stopping when he found a familiar name: the shepherd. The real identity of the shepherd, the mastermind behind the entire operation, was someone Hayes had never expected. The files opened up to a photograph. A man in a suit, standing in front of a private jet, his face half obscured by shadows. But Hayes knew that face. It was the same man who had been lurking in the background of the investigation from the start. Darren Carlisle. Darren Carlisle was one of the wealthiest businessmen in the city, a philanthropist who had made a name for himself by donating millions to various causes. But beneath that polished exterior was a man who had been pulling the strings behind countless scandals, corruptions, and disappearances. He was the true face of the Shepherd, the man who had been orchestrating everything from the shadows. Hayes's mind reeled as he processed the information. Carlisle wasn't just a businessman. He was the head of an underground network that had been manipulating people, ruining lives, and getting away with murder. Claire had uncovered something that Carlisle and Michael didn't want anyone to know, and they had silenced her for it. Just as Hayes was about to make his move, his phone rang again. This time, it was Sarah Michaels, the journalist who had been helping him all along. "Detective, you need to get back to the station," Sarah said urgently. "I've been doing some digging on Carlisle, and I've uncovered something big. I think it's the final piece of the puzzle. We can take him down, but we need to act fast." Hayes's heart raced. He knew this was it, the moment they had been waiting for. But he couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping through his fingers. The pieces were falling into place, but there were still so many unanswered questions. Where was Lauren? Was she in danger? And what had Michael meant when he said, "You're too late"? He had to move. Hayes raced back to the station, the weight of the investigation pressing down on him. The Shepherd was no longer just a name, it was a reality, and the truth was more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. As Hayes entered the station, he was met with a shocking sight. The entire team was on high alert, their faces grim. "Detective, you need to see this," one of the officers said, his voice trembling. The officer handed Hayes a piece of paper, its contents sending a shiver down his spine. It was a photograph of one of Hayes's own family members, standing outside his house. The note that accompanied it was simple but chilling. "You're too close. Stay away from this, or we'll make sure they're next." The message wasn't just a threat, it was a warning. Hayes's heart pounded in his chest. They were coming for him now. The note was simple, but it cut through Hayes's thoughts like a blade. "You're too close. Stay away from this, or we'll make sure they're next." His family. The photo of his wife and daughter taken from a distance. Hayes felt his heart race. They had always been his greatest source of strength, but now they had become his greatest vulnerability. The Shepherd had made their move. The message was clear. If Hayes didn't back off, if he didn't stop digging into Michael and the Shepherd's criminal empire, his family would pay the price. The cold chill of realization washed over him. This wasn't just a case anymore, it was personal. The Shepherd didn't just want to silence Claire, they wanted to destroy Hayes too, and his family was in the crosshairs. Hayes's mind raced. His first instinct was to rush home, to protect them. But he knew he couldn't. He had to finish this. He had to bring the Shepherd down. But the question loomed. Could he protect his family and still get to the truth? Hayes took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He knew there was no time to waste. If he wanted to save his family and Claire, he had to act fast. His only choice now was to move forward, to bring down the Shepherd and Michael, once and for all. He pulled out his phone and called Sarah Michaels, the journalist who had been working with him. She had uncovered some disturbing information about Darren Carlisle, and Hayes needed to know everything. "I need that information, Sarah. Now," Hayes said, his voice tense. "The Shepherd, I know who they are. Carlisle, I need everything you've got on him." Sarah's voice trembled on the other end. "I've been digging through everything. But Hayes, what I found, it's worse than you can imagine. Carlisle isn't just a businessman. He's the kingpin behind a vast criminal network, controlling everything from human trafficking to illegal arms deals. He's connected to powerful people, people who will do anything to keep their secrets safe." Hayes ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. He had suspected that Carlisle was the mastermind, But hearing it confirmed was another blow altogether. This wasn't just about Claire anymore. It wasn't just about Michael. This was a fight against an empire of corruption. I need everything, Sarah. Everything. I don't care what it takes. We have to bring him down. We have to stop this. The investigation had come to a boiling point. Hayes knew that if he was going to save his family and stop the shepherd, he needed leverage. He needed a way to get to Carlisle without risking more lives.